I want to start out with a harken back to my childhood and ask if anybody recognizes this. Anybody recognize that? Anybody? What if I do that? You have experience with one? You younger folk, you have no idea, and thankfully, you have no idea that this is kind of how order and discipline was kept in my elementary school, and many of our elementary schools. It was kind of phased out by the time I was in high school, so I don't know, were they used in high school? I don't think so. Were they? In yours, Bill? Okay. So this is a paddle, and some of the paddles were, decorated. This is the educator. This is my favorite one that I found. This is from a Catholic school. It says grip here firmly in case of frustration, and then board of education, and then the person with the sore bottoms, smacking the sore bottoms, and it says applied psychology. So I know it's like nervous laughing, right? It's like this. This is not good today, but that's kind of how it was in my day when I was in elementary school. This is how discipline was kept in my elementary school. And of course, some of them had like the holes in them. And, legend has it that made it, I don't know, go faster. I don't know. Like there's less wind resistance between here and here. I don't know. But we had teachers. I had teachers in my high school, and the principal, of course, had paddles. And if you were in the principal's office, the paddle, I assume, I was never in there, of course, but I assume the paddle was, up behind him, and he had some kind of decoration on it just to be like an enforcer, right? To keep the discipline. And in my school, I have these memories of being in the cafeteria, and we're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and we're goofing around the cafeteria, and our principal, Mr. Pandolfi, of course I remember his name. Mr. Pandolfi comes in. He was kind of a smaller guy, but he was Italian, so that gave him some energy, some passion. And so he would come into the cafeteria, and all the kids would just notice him walking in because, did he have a smile on his face? Was he like looking for the kid, And then sometimes he would walk over to a kid, and sometimes it would be like, tap, 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 come with me. And you're like, oh, what's happening, Other times it was grab the elbow and come with me, you know what I mean? And when that happened, the rest of us were like, huh? And we called them cracks. Okay. Is he going to get cracks? Is Mr. Pandolfi, is he going to get, like, what did he do? And it was just this whole culture in the school of, this is how we kind of do school and are disciplined, and like how they enforce discipline and keep kids safe and all of that, they would say. and so not only was the kid like, depending on how many times the kid had gotten cracks, of course, he would stand up, and it was usually a he, so I'm going to say he. He would stand up and be pulled by his elbow, and he'd be scared to death of the pain that was about to ensue. Also, there was also pain how? Psychological pain, in that he was walking in front of all of these students looking at him, saying, what did he do? And so there was a walk of shame, right? There was pain, there was shame. Everything's going to rhyme this morning, by the way, just to help. No, there was pain, and there was shame, and of course, I never had that walk of shame. I was a good kid, except for one time. One time, I did get into trouble. Like, I would get into trouble like, hey, Chris, you're not listening, or, redirection. I got into all of that like a normal kid, but I never really got into trouble except one time. But it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. My friend Scott Shearer, I still remember his name. He's the one who got me in trouble. In those days, the spitballs were a big thing, with the straws and the spitballs, and, you would shoot them and they'd stick on the ceiling and on the wall and whoever. And so the straw thing of shooting things through straws was just kind of a common thing. And so Scott got this idea. I think it was because Raiders of the Lost Ark had come out. And there were like blow dart guns, And so he's like, hey, let's make some blow dart guns. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And let's bring them to school and shoot people. That's a great idea, Scott. And so we made these little blow dart guns with little needles, and little string and stuff. And once we got caught, I was like, I think this was a bad idea. No joke. I really didn't. I was so ignorant because I was so afraid of breaking rules. I was always a rule follower and all of that. So anyway, we get caught. Long story short, of course, we're in 6th grade at the time, and I haven't mentioned Mr. Mitchelltree yet. And I remember, of course, him, because he was in the other classroom, but he was a minor league baseball player. Do I need to say more? He had been a minor league baseball player. He had his own paddle, and like whenever 6th graders got into trouble, because we were the older ones and we were in the classes, he would do the paddling. And it would go something like this. You would get into trouble, they would negotiate, is this a paddle-worthy thing? And the kid would go into the hallway. There were 2 6th grade classrooms right by each other. And then out in the hallway was like a pod, and like there was a wall, and the kids would go up and they would stand against the wall outside the classrooms. Pop! Sounds. All the other kids would hear it. You following me? So it was this whole thing. And so here I am, like so we get caught, and I'm like, am I going to get cracks? Is that what's happening here? And I'm starting to freak out, of course. Probably more for the shame, honestly. In all honesty, it was like I was so afraid of being embarrassed and all of that. So Mr. Mitchelltree and Mrs. Jones were negotiating, like, what should we do with them? And again, it was 6th grade. I'd been there for 6 years, and I was a good kid and all of that. And they decided to have mercy. Didn't get cracks. I don't know why. I think we got detention or something like that. But I remember that time of doing something wrong. Being embarrassed, being ashamed. Yes, I broke a rule. And I shouldn't have done this. I was guilty, And I couldn't articulate it at the time, but experiencing mercy. I didn't get what I deserved. I have a feeling if it was just Scott, no offense to Scott, wherever you are, he would have gotten cracks because he had gotten cracks before. So I don't know, I'm just speculating, but I experienced this mercy. And so Bill talked last week about shame and about how we live in this broken world. It's not just out there, but it's in our hearts. It's in our minds, this brokenness, and this sin nature that's in us kind of draws us toward, selfish things and broken things. And the Bible word is sin, and we're sinning and we feel this, what was it, Bill? It was a nausea of the soul, or like a whole body, emotional nausea. And we all experience that. And he talked about how Jesus isn't ashamed of us. Well, today I want to ask the question, where and how do we find mercy and grace in our time of need? That's the scripture, but specifically in shame. When we've done something wrong, when we know we've been selfish, when we know that we've hurt somebody, when we know that we've cheated, when we've done all of these things, and we're feeling this emotional nausea, what do we do with it? Where do we go? Does anybody have an idea? It's a really easy answer. Where should we go? Where should we go? We should give it to God. We should go to Jesus. That's right. But today, we're going to dive into this image of Jesus that is so incredibly helpful. Because the churchy answer is yes, go to Jesus. He'll give you grace and mercy, and that's all of that is true. But man, there's this image of Jesus, this perspective of Jesus as high priest that is so incredibly rich and powerful that allows us to understand, well, what is Jesus just nice? Is that why? Oh, it's more than that. It's so much more than that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Jesus is our perfect high priest. Well, if we're going to talk about Jesus as high priest, we're going to have to talk a little bit about the tabernacle and a little bit about the sacrificial system. So I do have toys for everybody. Can we have people help? Can you guys help pass out? Anybody who wants to go pass those out? Everybody gets one. You can however you want to do it. Yeah, don't let them choose. It'll take forever. It's like, I'm going to dig through all of these to find the one, the pretty little bunny. Okay, everybody gets one. Everybody gets one. This is your sacrificial animal. And yes, you can't keep it as a pet. Okay, here's our passage as that's happening. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firm to the faith we profess. First verse, second verse. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Third, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive what? Mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So look at that last sentence. That was our question. Where and how do we find mercy and grace in our time of need? Well, we approach Jesus and his throne of grace, and so let's build to that, okay? That's where we'll end, but we want to start with the first one. Now, when we talk about high priest in this setting, there are some Catholic friends. I won't have you raise your hands unless you're proud, you feel free. But some Catholic friends, when you think of priest, you might think of the Pope or obviously a priest in a parish or those kinds of things. We Protestants, we don't necessarily have that image in our mind. We might have something like from television, from The Chosen, from some other dramatic thing. But if you're Gen X, any Gen Xers in the house? Gen X, come on, be proud. If you're Gen X, you probably, somewhere in your memory, you have this in your mind. Am I right? Are you ready? Here we go. Marriage is what brings us together. That's right. So these might be the images, but of course they're not accurate, of Jesus as high priest. If Jesus is our perfect high priest, I just want to think of two words today. That's really is it. We're going to do two words today. Just dig into these: access and approach. Access and approach. So first, access. Here's verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. This sounds pretty innocuous, like straightforward. Jesus ascended into heaven, we have faith, we approach him. But there's a richness to this that is really valuable for us to know. You may know that in the Old Testament, when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, God was, how big do I get here? Do I get meta? Do I get mega? Macro? So God is shaping a people for himself. That's what God is doing, we read in the Bible. There is a God who created humans, and he is shaping and calling and nurturing a people who will reflect him to the world. Okay, big picture. And so in the Old Testament, the Israelites were set free from Egypt, and they were wandering around in the desert, and God was shaping them, and in order to shape them, they had to get near to him. Right? Having access to God is like the central problem, you might say, or the central issue of like every religion. It's like, who gets to be close? And what do I have to do to get close to this God? Of course, if the God is, a God of love and those kinds of things, maybe you want to run the other way, but if he's not. But that's the question, is access. Okay, so God in his brilliance, he's setting the Israelite people up for when Jesus comes, right? You know that. And so in the Old Testament, there was a tabernacle, and I'm just going to let you use your imaginations. I decided not to have any pictures. So just use your imagination. There's a tabernacle in the desert. It has to be mobile, of course, so it's a tent, but it's an elaborate tent. And it has kind of an outer ring to it called the outer courtyard, right? And it's open air, and the outer courtyard is where people would come and they would bring their sacrifices, right? They would bring their sacrifice to the priest. And there was a priest who had kind of a daily, that was their assignment for that day. And they would receive the sacrifices, and not only did the priest do that, but there was also, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in the outer courtyard, That was the place of worship, and people would come, and they would come into that outer gate, and they would say, into the presence of God, and they would give their animals to the priest to sacrifice and sprinkle the blood. Blood was a very big deal. Again, God is setting the people up for when Jesus comes. It's a shadow of things to come. And so you can imagine, just use your imagination. It's kind of an open, space, like an amphitheater kind of space, but not that big. People are there worshiping and praying and singing psalms, and the priest is offering on the altar, and that's just, that's what God provided for them, to be close to him in that desert situation, wherever they were. And there were different sacrifices. We don't have time to get through all of them, but some of them were like for guilt sacrifices or sin sacrifices, right? And they would take one of their animals, and God provided this whole system because he didn't want people to live in their sin. He didn't want people to live in the guilt of their sin. But he also knew that sin was so powerful, and it wasn't just moral sin, it was like the whole brokenness was just powerful. And so he provided a way for people to give over something tangible so that they could receive freedom and forgiveness. This whole thing was grace. And so the people would bring their animals to the priest who would sacrifice, and the priest would, do his thing, and the people would receive forgiveness. And of course, it was all symbolic, right? We know that animals don't have anything intrinsically magical or spiritual about them, and the blood doesn't, and all of that. But God was giving them something tangible to see something that was real, which was forgiveness for their offering, coming to him. And so that's what access is. But there were two more sections of the tabernacle where people could not go. There was an inner part, which is called the holy place, which is where the menorah, and there were candles in there, and the priest would go in and do his thing every day, and they had a daily ritual. And then there was the Holy of Holies in the middle of that. And again, all of this is symbolic. God is doing object lessons for them constantly for like hundreds of years. And the Holy of Holies is where the dwelling place of God was. That was the symbolic dwelling place of God. So the Ark of the Covenant, thinking Raiders of the Lost Ark. Remember what happened when they opened the Ark? You guys remember? The faces like melted off their heads. I don't think that's totally accurate. But it was true that only one person could go in there, the high priest. One person. And it wasn't a person who was the holiest or anything. It was just God just said, you're the high priest. It was Aaron. And he only went in once a year, one day a year into that place. All the other, 364 days, nobody went in there because it was the holy place, the holiest place. God was there. Ark was there. 10 Commandments were in there. Manna was in there. And so the high priest would go in once a year for this ritual that God ordained. He said, on one day a year, I want you to go in, and it was a commemoration of the Day of Atonement, right, when God passed over and the Israelites in Egypt. And so he would go in for the Day of Atonement, and this is how it went. He would tie a little rope around his ankle and with a little bell, and the rope would go out there. Why? Because if he goes in there and he does his thing, he does it wrong, or he's like irreverent, or he's lackadaisical, or like he just like cuts corners on like the ritual, bam, he's dead. That's how holy this was. This was a real deal. And so the people would have to pull him out because you can't go in to get him. So they pull him out. I'm not joking. That's a real thing. That really happened. Look it up. And so this is how serious it was. One day a year. And so here's what happened, long story short. He would take two lambs. I have one in my hand. He would take two lambs. Get another one. Oh, that's a bunny. I think I see a lamb. I have to be perfectly accurate in my symbolism. Here we go. He would have two lambs. Take two lambs in there. There were others as well, but I'm shortening for the sake of time. He would have two lambs, and one of them would be the sacrifice. He would sprinkle the blood and do all of his things. Okay, you're dead. Boom. It was for forgiveness. It was like a joyful thing. We wouldn't make it as Israelites, would we? No, we could never do the sacrificial system. The other one, though, we're going to celebrate. Okay. So the other one, again, God commanded the high priest to lay his hands on a head, again, symbolically. Nothing was like magical about this. He would lay his hands on the head, and he would convey all of the sins of the people, onto the head of this goat. You know? Again, God was kind of like instructing him symbolically to do this. This is what I'm doing, God is saying. So put your hands on it. You are my holy high priest. Put your hands on the head. And all of the sins go on there. And what happened to this goat? He got to run away. Right? Which is where we get scapegoat. And so imagine this. This is a big deal. On the Day of Atonement, all of the Israelites would be, you know, they're all watching. This is the one day a year. And so they would be watching, and the priest would go in and do his thing for a while, and then it was like silence, you know, and then the goat would come out and just run away into the wilderness. And they'd all look at it, and they'd celebrate, because there go all our sins. God forgave us. Everything? Yes, everything. I didn't confess everything. It's okay. Because he provided the forgiveness through this. Out into the wilderness. Now they have access. Because of what God did for them. Into his presence. They have access. But Jesus didn't go into the Holy of Holies. Where did he go? He went into heaven. Now, don't think of heaven as like this place that's up there and out there. Whenever you see heaven in the Bible, it just means God's dwelling. Wherever God is dwelling, that's the heavens or heaven. You know. And so Jesus didn't just go into a tent, right? A symbolic tent. He went into the actual Holy of Holies, the place where God is. And so if you can tie that to the high priest ritual, now you're getting some of the depth of what this means. He went into the holiest place. He didn't offer a lamb because he offered what? Himself, right? He was the perfect sacrifice and scapegoat. And so we get to have access because of what Jesus did. He went in before us. He fulfilled all of the rituals. We don't have to do them. And we get to have access to God as we are. But I'm still a sinner. I'm going to get to that in a second. That's right. This is the central question for every religion. Who gets to have access, and what does it take? Right? We have a mosque that's right beside our neighborhood. And I had Muslim friends in college, and it's Ramadan. Some of you know that Ramadan, they fast during the day, celebrate at night. And I had this friend who played volleyball in college, and he was one of our setters. And we played volleyball. The volleyball season was during Ramadan. We would have all-day tournaments, and he wasn't allowed to eat or drink for like 10 hours while we were playing volleyball. And so pick your religion. There are things that you do, right? I'm not suggesting that fasting is wrong or anything like that. In fact, I hear the celebrations like they like have big parties at night. I'm like, that's a great idea. They should celebrate. They should come together. But every religion is asking the question, how do I get access to God? And every religion says, okay, you got to do this thing. And then you have to do this thing. And then do this the best you can. Follow this rule. And then, you know, probably. Jesus is saying, and the writer of Hebrews is saying, there's no religion. There are no rules for us to have access to God. And Jesus is our access. He's the key. He did everything for us, you know? He ascended into heaven, so we hold firmly to the faith. We trust in him, not in ourselves. And that gets to the second word. Verses 15 and 16. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy find grace to help us in our time of need. So verse 15 first. There's a tension here for sure. So Jesus has provided access to us. That's kind of the gospel, the central message of the Christian faith, is that you have access to this holy God, not because you've done anything good or right, or that you can uphold any of the laws, but because of what Jesus did. That's the central message of the Christian faith. But here, we don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are. This gets at the idea of shame. Now we kind of know, if you've been a Christian, been in church, you kind of know the whole Jesus died for me, sins on the cross, I'm forgiven. I get that. But now that I get that, you see, God designed it in such a way that we have to approach him. You see what I'm saying? That he opens the way for us and says, come on in. Come to me. That's why the Bible says God draws near to those who draw near to him. So we have to approach. And so that's the central, what do we do with that when we're guilty and feel shame? What do we do with the approach? The first is to recognize that Jesus empathizes with us. Jesus empathizes with us. Empathy means I feel what you're feeling. There's no judgment. So you can see why this is a big deal and how it could have been like a huge deterrent to people in the desert. Just let your imagination go for a second here. You step out of your tent with your lamb. You're walking down the street with your lamb, your guilt offering. Everybody's looking at you. Oh, there goes Phil again. He's got his guilt offering. It's like the third day in a row. Did you know that, Phil? It's third day in a row. Wonder what he did this time. Next day, he brings like a cow. It's like a bigger one. It's like, oh my gosh, Phil is really in trouble. Look at Phil, man. Oh my gosh, Phil. What are we going to do with Phil? And then he gets to, you can imagine, he gets to the tabernacle outer court, and he brings his animal, and the priest could be like, again? Phil? Come on, man. What is wrong with you? Have some discipline. Change your behavior. You see how that could get really hard? That could get really bad. Unless, and God built this into the system. Here's the brilliance. Before the priest offered sacrifices for the people, he had to offer a sacrifice for himself. Hey, priest, you're just like everybody else. You got to offer sacrifice every time because you're a sinner too. I forgive you. I've given you a way to be forgiven, but you can't look down on anybody else. And so the priests recognized they were just like everybody else. And the people knew that the priests knew that because they knew the system. And everybody in the village knew that because they knew the system. And so nobody was looking, I'm not saying they weren't looking down, maybe there were some people who were, but the system was that everybody was the same level. Priest, quote unquote, worst sinner, same in the kingdom of God in that way, before God. And so here we have the writer of Hebrews saying, well, Jesus empathizes with us. So when you think about approaching Jesus with your shame, you are not going to get, oh, Chris, again? Come on, man. You're not going to get that. You are going to get empathy. Oh, I know what you're feeling. Dude, I know. I get it. This is the tension. Jesus did it without sin. He didn't follow through on the temptations. But he was tempted in every way like we are. Every temptation, every, big and small temptation. To be selfish or to cut corners or to control people or, He was tempted in every way. Every way. And so when we approach him with our shame or our brokenness that we genuinely maybe should be feeling, or our guilt, we receive empathy from Jesus. This is not a holier than thou, faith. This is an empathetic faith. So that's the beauty of the verse 15. We have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Okay, verse 16. Here's the approach. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Hopefully you're connecting the dots now. We started with Jesus gives us access because of who he is and what he did, not because of anything that we did. All we do is say, oh, yes, I will walk, I will approach. Like that's the whole thing. We don't have to bring anything, we don't have to anything because Jesus took care of it. So we approach with confidence. You see why that's important? The first things are important. Where's your confidence? Again, every religion, access to God. How confident am I in approaching God if I have to do these 5 religious things just right? My confidence lies in my own ability to do that. And hopefully the mercy of God, and maybe I fell short a little bit and kind of gets murky there. But if Jesus did everything, my confidence is not in my ability. My confidence is in his ability. And so when I'm shamed and I come before Jesus and I walk to him, I'm not thinking I'm walking toward him because there's anything in me that is worth walking toward him for. I'm bringing my shame. I'm bringing the legitimate sin that I have done, that I should be feeling some kind of nausea about, probably. I'm bringing that, but I don't feel shame. I don't feel shame from him. Because my confidence is in him, not in me. I don't have to wonder as I'm approaching God, have I done it? Have I done everything? Have I checked all the boxes? I'm going to think back. I think I did this, but it wasn't my best. I don't have to think. That doesn't even have to cross our minds, people, when it comes to approaching Jesus. Just approach Jesus. He's done everything. Don't have to worry about it. We approach with confidence in him. We were driving in a car, and I was driving with Peter, and we had one of his friends who was Catholic, and he had just been through, what's it called? 8th grade? Confirmation and PSR, is that the? Okay, CCD, yeah. So he had just been through that, and he had learned about all the sins, and I'm sure a lot of other things, but he had learned about the sins, and this is what came up, and I can't remember the exact context, but he was saying he was really nervous. He was really anxious, and he said, "Yeah, I wanted to go to church, but my parents, they for one reason or another, they didn't take him, and they couldn't take him, and he was super anxious because he was taught, you got to go to church. You got to go to church. You got to go to Mass." And so in that moment, I said, "Man, you're such an idiot. How stupid. No. I was like, I felt this empathy, like, oh, okay. And I said, I think in this case, God's grace covers you. I think so. Felt empathy for him. And I believe that. And I believe that. I believe God's grace covers him, just like everybody. His confidence was in his own, ability to follow the rules that he was taught. Man, that's just messy. That's tough. That's anxiety producing and shame producing. But if my confidence is in Jesus, then he's done it for me. Another story about lack of confidence. Yesterday, I was sitting in the passenger seat of my car while my 15-year-old drove for the first time. how'd it go, buddy? He's like, I hated that. I never want to do that again. So if you've ever been in that situation, that a little lighter picture of what it means to lack confidence in your own abilities. Just total lack of confidence, just fear, like, am I going to hit something? Am I breaking a rule? And so, not maybe only once or twice, right, Peter? You went right through a stop sign? Just once, okay. We were in a neighborhood, nobody was around, so I didn't say anything. I was just like, you going to stop at that? Because he was so scared of trying to follow the rules, and he's looking at the road. I better do this right. And every crossroad we would come to, he's sitting back there so I can joke with him. But every crossroad we would come to, there would be no signs or anything. He'd slow down. I'm like, what are you slowing down for? Do I have to stop here? No, there's no stop sign. There's no stop sign. But he was thinking like, all of these, there are a bunch of rules. I don't even know what they are. I got to follow all of them right now, or if I'm going to kill somebody, or worse, I'm going to wreck the car, and Dad's going to be mad, and he's going to pay for it. Right? So that's kind of a lighthearted way to think about the heaviness of trying to follow all the rules, not even knowing all of them. And so the beauty of this whole image of Jesus as high priest is that God prepared the Israelites and us to see how Jesus gives us access through his blood and through his life, his obedience. We can approach him because he's empathetic. He didn't sin, but he was tested in every way. And so the image is more like this. We have access because of the cross. It's not a secret code. And we approach with confidence. Last story, in college I met some of the best friends of my life. And after college, I decided, I'll take credit. I decided we should keep getting together, even after we graduated. So each summer, we would get together, 5 of us, and we would camp somewhere. One of my friends, Scott, had a boat, and we went to the lake sometimes and water skied and all of that, and picked somewhere fun to go, and we'd spend 3 or 4 days together. And as was our custom, as we were in college, we would gather, I don't know, semi-weekly or something like that, just to be together and pray together and confess our sins and just be guys together. And so I was like, that was so powerful. Let's keep doing that. And so every summer for 10 or 12 years, every summer, I don't think we missed a summer. For 3 or 4 days, we would go camp. And first night of camping, one at a time, we would get into the hot seat and we just bleh. Here's all my mess. Here's all the stuff that I'm ashamed of. Here's all the stuff that, God, I need God's help in all of this, and, all my sin. And really it was. And guess what we received from each other? Mercy and grace. Because I know exactly what you're feeling. I know exactly how you're feeling. Oh, yeah, me too. And no judgment. How much did I look forward to those camping trips? Big time. I wasn't anxious about them. I wasn't thinking, oh man, I gotta go confess my sin again. It was freeing. I was confident that it was going to be a great time. Jesus gives us that, and we can approach his throne with confidence. So you have an animal. Depending on the size of your animal, that determines how big your sin is. I didn't tell you that. That was just, how they cast lots and believe that Grant just gave you whatever your sin size was. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't know what to do with these right now. I don't have a plan. But I'm thinking a few things. So this obviously is symbolic, and so you can, whatever God is doing in you, you can use this as whatever symbol is helpful for you to approach him with confidence. Maybe it's while we worship, because they offered sacrifices of worship too, right? It wasn't just sin offering. You can somehow offer this as a sacrifice to him, or, you feel free as we're worshiping. We'll sing 3 songs here in a moment as we're worshiping. Come up and put them on. We don't have an altar in the vineyard, but if you want to come up and put it on the stage here, just as symbolic. Jesus, this is the thing. This is my offering today. And you come up and just put it on there, or just have it in your hand, or whatever. You can take it home and put it on, where you can see it, so to remind you of what Jesus did for you. That he's already done this for you. I'm not sure. Use this as God leads you.